Now I will start with the fuselage. There are two basic ways of making a fuselage, and that depends on the type of plane that you're modeling. For inline motors, the fuselage tends to be narrow, and they can be built as a box and just round the corners off. For radial engines, the fuselage is usually much more rounded, and in these two cases with the T28 and the Zero, I used ready board and just bent the foam around the formers. For the Wildcat, the fuselage is much larger, and I made formers and just gluing strips of Dapron to the sides of these formers, and then I'll fill it in later and just sand everything off. The firewall here is thin plywood. Also notice that I doubled these formers here where the wing goes, because the wing in this case comes almost through the middle of the fuselage, so I can cut these out later and add that piece to the bottom of the wing. I have finished filling in the spaces with the strips of foam, sanded it down, and patched the cracks with light spackle. I like to use light spackle, first of all, because it's light, it doesn't shrink, and it sands pretty nice and smoothly. Then I cut out the place for the wing. In this case, I set up this hopefully so that it's level with the axis of the fuselage, and then before I joined the wings, set it on there and traced around it to get the shape of the wing. And of course I had doubled these formers here so that now I have the formers on the piece that goes on the wing. Then I started with the tail assembly. In this case, the elevator and stabilizer are slightly above the fuselage, so I put in this piece and glued it to the former that is right here, as well as to the bottom of the fuselage, so that this is very stable. Next, I will build the tail. The stabilizer and elevators are cut out and smoothed off, and I like to add a small carbon fiber rod along the trailing edge of the stabilizer just to give it a little more rigidity. The halves of the elevator are joined with a stick glued in place. The hinge is the same as with the ailerons. Then for assembling this onto the fuselage, I have first joined the wings and added the wing hold downs, which are made from just kebab skewers. These are nice because they have points on them. You can just poke them through and then rubber band the wing into place to make sure that the saddle where the wing joins the fuselage fits pretty well. And the other reason for putting the wing on is so that when you place your stabilizer on the mount here, you can sight along the wing to make sure that the elevator is level with the wing. So the stabilizer and rudder have been attached, and I've added these small reinforcing pieces on the top and on the bottom of the elevator. These seem to add sufficient strength, and I've also added a little epoxy down here because of the way the tail section is elevated there. still need to put in the linkage for the elevator, and I'm not using a rudder control on this plane because I rarely use it when I'm flying. And then I've started also on the canopy. After that, then everything gets a little more patching up and smoothing off before painting. So now I have finished spackling all of the obvious places and sanded everything down smooth so that it's ready to paint. The very last thing that I did was to make holes in the wing here for my fingers so that I could launch the plane and not need wheels. This fuselage is pretty big to try to hold it back here to launch it like that. But this, I found this works well even for much larger models. So here it is, ready to go. An overriding principle that I use for building is to build the planes light. This one has a wing loading of 9, which isn't bad. So now all I have to do is wait for good enough weather to fly it and see how it goes.